Welcome back to Second Breakfast and our ongoing journey through Game of Thrones. Today we're talking about Bran 3, which is a big, fun, vision, thread, raven, crow chapter. But before we get into that, and this is not a throw to a sponsorship, wouldn't it be nice if we got one of those?
One day.
I just wanted to throw back to the old days and open with something really dumb. So I was questioning myself the other day. You ever do something that totally makes sense in your head, and then a day later, you're like, what an idiot.
Yeah, every day of my life. That's my constant reality.
This might be a boy thing. I don't know.
Okay.
But I always record in the same pair of green shorts. We'll talk about that a different day.
I think we've talked about it before.
I was changing into my recording shorts before we sat down in the studio today at the top of the Empire State Building. And there's a smear on our closet wall. Because the other day, there was a moth that got into the apartment.
Oh, no.
And I didn't find the moth. Like, I didn't kill it when it came in. And eventually, I killed it when it was on top of these shorts.
Ah, okay.
And I was, whacking and trying to kill it and fighting for my life. And I killed it against the wall. I, smacked and smeared it.
Were his guts still on the wall?
And I was so upset. Because, moths eating clothes. That's what they're there for, right? That and, bumping into light bulbs like those birds in the old Windex ads.
Right, those are its two functions.
And I was so scandalized by this dumbass little bug that was going to, eat my clothing? Mm-hmm. My beloved clothes?
Your special
I can't do
recording
the podcast
shorts?
without these shorts.
Also, how is it going to eat those? Those are 100% polyester. How is it going to eat plastic?
There's no podcast without this pair of shorts.
Sure.
And I was so upset at the nerve of this moth that I smeared him across the wall and did not clean it up. And I'm the bug cleaner. I'm the bug killer for the family.
And you're not a messy person. You
No.
clean up immediately after everything you do that makes a mess.
Every spider, every cockroach. I jump right in.
You do.
I left this thing's guts on the walls as a message to future moths.
You've done that before, actually. Not inside the home, but outside. There was one time you killed a particularly nasty spider, and we left its guts on the wall. It was right outside our front door, so that all the other bugs would know not to tread on our doorstep.
And yes, I started this by saying I was stupid.
No.
But I haven't seen any more moths.
Well, that's pretty good. Have you since cleaned up the guts? Or
No.
are they still... Oh, we got to do that.
Well, yeah.
We should take care of that.
I think they've gotten the message now.
If you like to leave bug guts on your walls, comment below or send us an email.
On Patreon.
Speaking of Patreon,
If you're a moth.
Cam, what's our Patreon like? What do we have going on over there?
$2 a month, you get a bonus episode or more than one. These past 2 months, we've had 2 big bad bonus episodes over on Patreon, and you get access to the whole back catalog of everything we've piled up over there over the last 2 years. This month's bonus episodes are us talking about the 1984 David Lynch Dune adaptation, which is weird and wacky and wonderful. That was a big fun discussion, and 52 minutes of an extremely passionate, focused discussion about book formats and
very fun.
The pros and cons of trade paperback, mass market paperback, audiobook, and ebook.
It was very, very fun. Speaking of books, let's talk about this book chapter today.
Okay,
we are talking. I've 4 years in. I've mastered the transitions. We're coming up on 4 years on this show.
Yes, we are.
Well, so this is okay. So we're deep into Game of Thrones. If you've never been here before, we have read the books and seen the show before. So we're going to spoil everything, and I'm really, 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 really going to spoil some stuff in this one. So buckle up.
If you've never been here before, congratulations on making it through the Moth interlude.
You've really shown that you're interested in this discussion. No, it's going to be really fun. I'm excited. So let me give a brief recap of this chapter so we can all dive in. This chapter, ladies and gentlemen, and everybody, was a whopping 5 pages long. It was just real quick, but it is so full of meaning, the way that all of George R.R. Martin's chapters and pages are. So let's dive in. So this is a Game of Thrones, Bran number 3. Bran is asleep, dreaming. And so the rest of this chapter is just a dream. So in his dream, he is falling, and he hears a voice telling him to fly. But Bran says that he can't fly. And then the voice says, "Have you ever tried?" And it turns out the voice belongs to a crow. This crow sort of appears and follows Bran throughout the rest of the dream. Bran then, as he's falling, remembers the moment when Jaime pushed him from the tower. And he's, upset and afraid. And the crow tells him to forget it and put it aside.
Get over it.
Get over it. The crow then tells Bran to look down, and Bran, after some hesitation, finally looks down, and he sees everything. He sees Winterfell. He sees Robb and Hodor and Maester Luwin at Winterfell. He sees Catelyn over on her ship where she's heading down to King's Landing. She's looking down at a blood-stained knife on the table in front of her, and there's a storm ahead of her that she can't see. He sees Ned and Arya and Sansa at the Trident with shadows all around them. He looks across the narrow sea, and he looks all the way to Ashai by the shadow where dragons stirred beneath the sunrise. And then he starts to look north, and he looks to the wall, and he sees Jon lying in a cold bed alone. And then he continues to look past the wall, further north, to the end of the world and beyond it, deep into the heart of winter. And suddenly he's very afraid. And the crow says, "Now you know why you must live, because winter is coming." And so then, like, Bran is falling, and the crow says, "Choose now, fly or die." And Bran spreads his arms and flies. And he has this, like, euphoric, transformative moment, basically.
His Black Swan moment.
Yeah, exactly. I was perfect. And then the crow, Bran looks over and sees that the crow has 3 eyes. There's a third eye in between, his 2. And then the crow, what are you laughing? Are you just laughing at the Black Swan
Bran
thing?
in the wheelbarrow being pushed by Mila Kunis.
She's got the tattoos on her back. Oh, man. Lose yourself. Okay. We did an episode on Black Swan, by the way, if you guys want to check that out. All right. Back to this. The crow has 3 eyes, and then the crow begins to peck at Bran's forehead, basically burrowing his own third eye into his forehead. And then Bran wakes up. He wakes from his dream, and he's in his bed at Winterfell, and he finds that he can't move. And there's cold coming in from the window, but then his wolf appears, and the wolf is incredibly warm against the cold. And Robb bursts into the room, and Bran just says, "His name is Summer." And that's it. This is like one of my favorite, most memorable chapters of this entire series. I remembered it well, and I couldn't remember if anything happened beyond the dream, but I remember the dream being incredibly prophetic and rich in meaning and really exciting. And it was so cool that by the time I had watched further along in the show, I then understood what this dream was, because I finally read along or watched along to the whole 3-eyed raven thing. And it was really exciting to remember this chapter and finally start to put some pieces together. So I'm excited to dive into this with you.
Yeah, I'd forgotten how foreboding this one feels. It reminded me forcibly of that Dany chapter, where she has all those images and futures and teases, where it feels like, coming next season on Game of Thrones.
The one that we haven't read yet? That's what you're talking about?
Yeah. But I remember
In
that
the House
chapter.
of the Undying. Yeah.
Yes, I remember that one so forcefully. This reminded me of that, but for Bran, something you made me think of the way you laid this out in the recap. We've been talking so much about these echoes and distillation echoes, and I didn't have any of those when I was doing my notes initially. But thinking about it now, the way you laid it out, I think it's that every successive chapter of this book is somehow the second half of a couplet that began in the previous chapter.
Okay.
And I couldn't catch the precedent, the thing that is being doubled down upon and paid off in these pages. But I think it's Micah.
Ooh, the butcher's boy who died last chapter.
The long, uncertain specter of this innocent young boy dying. I think that's, Bran is going through that arc in slow motion here.
Interesting.
And he gets to sort of choose whether he lives or dies.
Fly or die, yeah.
But I think that's the other half of this couplet.
That's really interesting. So what might that tell us about Bran or Micah or just kids in this world? I mean, shit's hard for them. It's a harsh, cruel world for them. Interestingly, Micah is killed by the Hound, who is basically the Lannisters' what do you say? He does their stuff. Bitter. He does their bidding. Sorry, I couldn't think of that word. He does their bidding.
This coffee's too bitter.
The Hound does the Lannisters' bidding. And then, of course, Bran is almost killed by a Lannister, by Jaime.
Yes.
So that connection is fun. I like that.
So, yeah, I want to... That's not part of my notes. That was just sort of
that's an interesting
rolling
observation.
Off the dome.
Sure.
But I'm interested in the long lens of this chapter and Bran's arc as a whole. And again, we don't have the end of the books here. We know from the show loosely where things are probably going to end up, but I want to look at that whole arc because I think this chapter, the first 2 chapters for Bran were setting him up and then giving him his inciting incident, his little call to adventure.
Sure.
And now I think we're dealing with a different character. We're almost in that Gandalf the Grey, Gandalf the White territory.
Oh, yeah.
Because I think the journey to Bran becoming this inhuman 3-eyed raven, I think that has already started. now. In this chapter, that has begun.
Yeah, of course.
So in the same way we talk about, or my theory when we were reading Lord of the Rings was that Gandalf the White is not Gandalf the Grey, is a reanimated zombie who's sort of being puppeteered by the god of Middle-earth.
Yes.
Taking the form of this familiar, welcomed shape of Gandalf to sort of tip the scales. I think this chapter could be viewed as Bran almost being possessed by whatever this thing is. We'll talk later about what we think or who we think the crow really is. But I think that possession sort of happens here. So you could argue that from this point going forward, it's not really Bran anymore. There's sort of something else going on, whatever's living in that third eye in his forehead.
Sure.
But I'm very interested in that transformation.
Yeah.
From Bran to, we know he eventually becomes the new Three-Eyed Raven. He's not a person anymore because he's losing his subjectivity. When we zoom out and look at the fantasy map at the beginning of the book that you're so fond of, that's sort of where half of this chapter takes place.
Yes.
Is scanning across that map.
I kept looking back at the map. I was like, okay, where's the trident? Where is the piece of the body of water that Catelyn is on? I was right. referencing the map a lot.
It means that this character is coming to inhabit the omniscient perspective.
Yes.
Which I want to sort of double down on this idea and emphasize it because everything he's seeing is true. We know from his little check-ins on the various POVs where he zooms in on his family members, we know all of that's actually happening.
Yeah, we've seen it all happen. Yeah.
And I don't think there's, looking ahead from the books and the show, I don't think George means us to question the validity of what Bran is seeing. I think it's fairly one-to-one.
Yeah.
He's being tapped into the Matrix. He's seeing what's actually happening.
Yes.
Obviously, my brain zoomed over to Dune.
Of course.
Because I think there's a similar massive transformation for your, traditional fantasy lead. If you look at Paul becoming what he becomes, here you have Bran becoming what he becomes. But the huge difference between these characters, and I think the comparison is enlightening. The thing that's happening with Paul is that he's getting subjective visions.
Yes, right.
And we get to see how that screws with him as he sees these possible futures and prophecies and things that might come to pass. Or if he does the right thing, he can bring about these futures. Bran is being tapped into objective truth.
Yes, and he's not then being presented with a what are you going to do about it? It's just I know this. It's not this is my prophecy, my destiny. How do I respond to it? Like Macbeth style. Right. It's more this is just what is. And it's just presented to him objectively.
By comparison, Paul's journey is fundamentally human and emotional and inconsistent and uncertain. And there's a messiness that does speak to sort of a tortured humanity at its center.
Right. And then, of course, when Bran's the Three-Eyed Raven, that humanity is just gone.
No, he's a blank slate.
Yeah, by the time
he's a robot.
By the time we get to season 8, he's just a monotone, computer, basically.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And the phrase that we really flagged when we just talked about the first Dune book for 3 weeks was Paul's terrible purpose.
Yes.
So it leapt off the page in this chapter when there's a reference to Bran's terrible knowledge.
Yes, I clocked that too. I was really hoping that you were going to talk about it.
And that objective-subjective divide, I think, is the key here. Because the information that Bran is getting access to here is truth. It's more sturdy. It's more powerful. And I think the price is very different than what Paul's journey costs him. Because Bran is losing, even already, I think, in these 4 or 5 pages, starting to lose his individualism. I noticed 2 little flags there. One, he's referring to the crow as it.
Sure.
That felt a little weird.
Yeah, why not he or she or whatever?
This book has given such prominence, even in the 100 pages we've read so far, to animals.
Yes.
And those animals have names and nicknames and genders. And to depersonalize the crow as it felt like a marked distinction in the way we're interacting with an animal, which again speaks to that new objectivity.
Yeah.
You don't have that anthropomorphizing. As much as this thing is talking, it doesn't feel familiar. It doesn't feel human and like it has an emotional attachment like the direwolves do.
Right. So then we're starting to sort of remove our attachment to and the humanity of Bran.
And as you're zooming out from that new perspective, then Bran his eye catches, as he's zooming over this map, his eye catches on the weirwood. And the way George describes the weirwood is like it's somehow living and sentient.
Right.
So that massive, that like tectonic perspective shift is already happening here in this first chapter post-accident. Or not accident, but you
Crime.
know what I mean.
Yeah.
Post-inciting incident.
Yeah.
It's such a shift in consciousness, I think, where he's attuned to things he wasn't aware of before, and he's detached from things that used to mean the world to him. And trying to look into like the so what question, I always try to see where the other shoe drops with these little theories. I feel like his mission or goal is changing as a character. You know, little Bran in the first 2 chapters wanted to be a knight. He wanted to make his father proud. He wanted to be a bannerman for Robb. We know none of that's going to happen now.
Of course
I
not.
mean, even trying to look past our bias of knowing what's going to happen, you can sort of tell that things have shifted now.
Right. And also, at the end of this chapter, we know that he can't move his legs. So a paralyzed person can't be a knight.
Yes, and that's, that's exactly where I wanted to settle in that last almost scene of this chapter, because I've been very interested in dichotomies from the very beginning of our discussion of this book, and the prologue front loads that dichotomy of the living versus the dead.
Yeah.
That's what the White Walkers are. That's what the humans are. That's the central mission of this story, seemingly from the first few pages. We get some new dichotomies in this chapter. One of them is, the cry, fly, die dichotomy, or I guess trichotomy. Some of that, I think, is just sort of a characterized escalation of the living and the dead.
Sure, yeah.
Cry or die, fly or die, same sort of thing.
Sure.
But the one that really spoke to me in terms of Bran and this sort of Paul comparison is the Crow speaking to Bran and giving him some just flat truths that will shape his quest. He tells him winter is coming. And that's not just him like speaking back his family words to him. Right. It's a confirmation that like, yes, these suspicions are correct and some bad stuff's going to come in.
Yes, because he says it right after Bran looks to the north, like past the wall, past the end of the world, right into the heart of winter. Yeah. So
we're being told to literalize those words a bit. And then when Bran wakes up, he names the wolf Summer. So that's the newest dichotomy, is the winter summer. And I think it is another advancement of the living and the dead, the flying and the dying. I think the winter and summer is sort of the same thing here.
Yeah.
But it reminded me, again, very much of the way Frank Herbert laid out characters. Because there are if you haven't listened to our Dune episodes, go do that. Those are a lot of fun.
They were fun.
We've gone through the whole first book in 3 parts. We're doing Messiah. We're doing Children. I'm going all the way here. And we're talking about the movies. But the way Frank Herbert starts most chapters is with a quote.
Yes.
Almost like from a historical perspective. And very often, alarmingly often, he totally spoils things. Speaking from that benefit of experience, future perspective, he'll totally spoil a character arc or major character deaths.
Yeah, fascinating. I really like that.
And that it functions as a recalibration because it tells the reader the point here is not the twists. And similarly, I don't think Game of Thrones, even though we talk about things like the Red Wedding and Ned being beheaded, I don't think those are the point of the book.
I don't either. They just keep it fun.
They serve some of the larger themes, the sort of anarchy and unfairness of the world, but I don't think in themselves those twists are the point.
Yeah, no, you're right.
What those things become then is a preview of character arcs. So you can look at things differently. It's that slight shift in perspective. And I got one of those shifts from this winter-summer dichotomy. Because I think it's part of Bran's changing mission or goal as he shifts from being Bran to being this three-eyed raven type figure that he will become. Bran being shown the Matrix, I don't think he immediately can fully process everything that's happened and say, okay, I accept this new reality and I'm fully on board.
Yeah, right.
But I think some part of him, the fact that the third eye isn't there when he reaches for it.
Yeah, it's not physically there.
It's like this new existence and consciousness has, like, you've poured it into the river of his mind, but he's not fully aware of it yet.
Right.
And I think him naming the wolf Summer is sort of that more subconscious part of him accepting the recalibration of his life. Because it reads to me as a mission statement, as almost a dedication to the quest that the Crow sort of offers him. Saying that winter is coming out of that trance almost, and naming the wolf Summer is almost a pledge that the world will keep turning. And we will get to the summer after the winter. It's looking ahead in the same way the last book of the series is supposed to be called A Dream of Spring or Dream for Spring.
I think, yeah.
It is looking on the horizon, looking for, planting the trees whose shade whatever that is.
Yeah.
I feel like this is Bran committing to that.
Okay, interesting. Well, and that works really well with this sort of theory we've sort of accepted a while ago that we got from Sam, our listener / sister, that she's my sister-in-law. It's fine. That she is, for all intents and purposes, my sister. Okay, but this
you can have her.
This this theory that the wolves are these aspirations of each of their respective Stark children. So that would make sense if like Summer is, Bran's wolf being named Summer is like the aspiration, not for Bran as an individual, because Bran as the individual no longer exists based on what you're saying and based on what happens. Like, I agree with that. So it's not his own personal ambition or aspiration, but it's more his aspiration for the world and for what will happen after this winter inevitably comes. Because again, he doesn't like wake from the dream thinking, okay, winter is coming. I better do something about it. I better stop it from happening. It's more, and then summer will come again. That's more what it is.
I want to sort of put the cherry on top here because I was looking at this long lens of Bran's journey and his transformation, and that brought me to where he ends in the show. And I have very different feelings about that ending after rereading this chapter and sort of looking at it with a much closer lens in the way that we do these discussions. In the show, the final stage of Bran's ascension is to become this like dead-eyed oracle and completely seemingly lose his individual humanity.
Yeah.
And after spending some time in that headspace in this chapter, that seems bad. That seems like a bad setup for a king and a leader.
Yeah.
And it reminds me of something from Dune.
Oh.
Now, if you care about minor spoilers for the 4th Dune book, skip ahead a minute or two.
Sure.
But basically, we're going to jump 3,500 years in the future. And without the big spoiler, the ruler now is this guy who's like part sandworm.
Right, yeah.
Half guy, half worm. And he's the God Emperor. The book is called God Emperor of Dune.
Yeah.
And that's who he is. And he is this similarly like depersonalized, brain in a vat sort of inhuman leader.
Right, yeah. That's terrifying. I don't like that.
Right.
And I didn't like it when they did it in the show. I was not happy with that decision.
But in the show, it was like, okay, Bran's got some special awareness of what's going on, but also he's a kid who's learned a lot from his journey and grown and matured and seen the world, and maybe he will make for a good leader. But now all I see is Bran as God Emperor.
Yeah.
And it seems like a really bad setup for a king. Like,
I agree.
When we get to the end of this book series, which I have full faith we will eventually, as George plugs along with the last 2 novels here, when we're seeing the end of this story, presumably from Bran's POV, I imagine that'll be the last chapter. Maybe there's an epilogue
Probably,
or something.
especially it would be a nice way to, circle things out because the first chapter is him.
When we read that ascension from his POV, how is it not going to feel like a disaster?
I know.
Or a red flag of like, oh, good, we have this AI-pilled inhuman robot leader who's going to take Westeros into the grand, proud...
Yeah, I don't like it. It's a little alarming.
Yeah?
And maybe that's the point. Maybe the point is like this world is never going to like be okay. But it was presented as though it was going to be, and I didn't like that.
The end of the show felt somehow hopeful or victorious.
It was incredibly optimistic, and like some people died, but it was like, and then it was all fine. And that was like my biggest thing that I didn't like about the ending, was that it just felt like it was all tied up far too neatly and like pleasantly. Yeah, so that is really alarming. I like that you're clocking Bran's transformation as beginning now, because I don't, in my memory of how this goes, that's not how I had been thinking about it. I figured the transformation doesn't truly happen until he meets the Three-Eyed Raven, like several books later. I mean, I know that Bran pre-fall and post-fall is a different person, but I figured it was just like, a wearier, more, wiser Bran and not a Three-Eyed Raven. But I think interpreting it as his transformation really has begun now, I think that makes sense. And I would like to keep following that along. Do you get those red flags as we see kind of the first stage of this shift? Like, Are you worried about what Bran will become? I think I'm more just like, I think that I had a hard time with the Three-Eyed Raven thing because he becomes so depersonalized and so objective that he almost has no function or no agency or no ability to do anything other than see and know. But otherwise, he doesn't actually actively do anything because he has no personal agenda or opinions as like far as I remember. And I found that to be kind of disheartening. I remember... I don't love how the Three-Eyed Raven thing plays out in the show. Mm-hmm. I found it, I mean, I'm sure they're having to do a lot of condensing. I didn't read it far enough into the books to learn about the Three-Eyed Raven in book form.
Yeah.
So I don't know what it's like there. But I remember in the show, it just felt kind of like just kind of shoved in there and didn't make a lot of sense. And Bran just became a monotonous nobody and it wasn't doing anything. I really didn't like it.
I think the thing that throws me about the end of the show, and I don't know if this is the end of the story,
right,
is that it's far too active a role for me, for Bran to be king.
Exactly. Like, you have to be active, like an active participant, somebody making decisions and judgment calls if you're the king. You can't be just like this chill, like, I see it all kind of guy.
And he's so receding from the world and the act of living that he seems to be, you know, if I could rewrite like that last episode, he would be the ultimate maester. He would be the ultimate hand of the king or like walking library. He would be a consultant.
An advisor, like your oracle that you talk to and get information from, but he can't be the one making decisions.
The ultimate objective resource becomes a resource. They stop being a person. If you look at, by contrast, the way Paul, with his subjective insight, of course, he's going to become a meddler and try to bring things to pass and manifest them and tinker and interfere with things on this high level. And that's how he ends up becoming, a not great emperor.
Right.
It's weird that Bran getting the objective side of it would end up possibly in the same position.
Yes. That was something that always struck me as strange. It didn't make sense to have a person who's so detached be the person in charge. It never made sense to me. And I really hope that is not the direction the books go. Or maybe they treat the Three-Eyed Raven in a really, George treats the Three-Eyed Raven in a really different way further along in the story. So I guess we'll just have to see.
Because he never feels villainous, does he?
Who, Bran?
No, the Three-Eyed Raven.
Oh, yeah, no.
He's kind of mystical.
He's like mystical and neutral. And like, it's good that you want your leader to be neutral in a way, but you don't want them to be so neutral that they have no opinions or agenda or like plans or policies for good things to happen. It doesn't make any sense at all.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think you're right to sort of track the transformation as beginning now rather than it being like this immediate shift, because it can't be immediate. And part of it is that he's starting to change, and part of it is that he's 7 years old and just received a ton of overloading information, but he also probably still kind of interprets it as a dream, because of course you would. So he's trying to grapple with all of that. My focus when I was reading through this was to try to unpack all the different like vignettes that Bran looks at throughout his dream. And I think I want to go through those together, if that's okay with you.
Sure. That is so not my department.
I figured you wouldn't care at all. So that's why and I really do. So
no, I do care. I'm just not good at it.
You're excellent at it. I think you just don't want to take the time. But anyway, so
you're just lazy.
You're just lazy. No, your brain works differently than mine. This is why we do this together. So you're right, and you pointed this out earlier. Bran is seeing these truths that are happening in real time. We've already gotten proof that they are happening from our other POV characters throughout Westeros. We know that all these things are happening. But I think every image that Bran sees has at least two meanings, if not more. I think we're sort of working on the present timeline and the future timeline. So I kind of want to go through each of these and unpack what I think is happening. So if we start with, I'm leaving a couple out, like I'm not going to talk about Maester Luwin, who cares? I'm going to talk about Robb. So Robb, the quote says, the wording I think is really crucial. So I'm going to like read the little quote for each spot and then talk about it. It says that Robb was taller and stronger than Bran remembered him, practicing swordplay in the yard with real steel in his hand. So of course, we know that Robb now does use real steel. We had Catelyn insist upon that. But I was thinking, okay, how long has Bran been asleep? It seems like he's been asleep for weeks, but not like years. Okay. But it says Robb is taller. I don't think Robb has actually gotten taller in the weeks that Bran has been asleep. I think metaphorically, Robb has had to grow up a bit. I mean, we see that happen in that chapter with Catelyn. He's really had to step up since Bran's fall. But then if we extend it to the future, Robb, of course, will get taller and stronger. He will grow up as the story goes along, you know, as a person is wont to do. But what's interesting is that Robb never quite achieves full adulthood because he dies so young.
Forever young.
Yes. And I was struck by the phrase practicing swordplay in the yard. That feels so juvenile and immature. And I think that sort of implies that Robb is never able to fully grow up. He's always kind of practicing and like playing at swords and playing at being this lord, even playing at being king of the North. He never quite achieves it.
So these check-ins with the characters are almost clues about their futures?
Yes, they are basically, here's what's happening in real time and here's a prophecy about their future. So that's Robb.
I didn't even think of that. My thought was just like, of course Robb looks tall. Every other man left Winterfell.
Sure, that's
He's
also
taller
true.
by comparison.
That's true, yeah. But and I think Robb is actually like my weakest one in this theory. So let's keep going. So then we get to the weirwood. It says that, which is the tree in the Godswood. The weirwood tree brooded over its reflection in the black pool. When it felt Bran watching it, it lifted its eyes from the still waters and stared back at him knowingly. So when we first are introduced to the Godswood, that's Catelyn's first chapter, and we learn about the old gods versus the new, and how the new gods, the seven gods, the ones that are worshipped in the south, in King's Landing and stuff, they are active and they have faces and names, and you can speak directly to those gods through prayer and rituals and all these sorts of things. The old gods in the north are faceless and nameless and are much less personal. The weirwood trees have faces carved into them to give them something for our human brains to grasp onto and look at and connect with. But the gods are not actively communicating with us in the way that the new gods do. But here the weirwood lifted its eyes from the still waters and stared back at Bran knowingly. And so I think here we're seeing that the old gods who don't normally communicate with humans are in conversation with Bran because Bran is becoming this three-eyed raven. So like if we want to do like the present and future thing, sure, the weirwood is there. It's currently there, but like why else mention it? And I think it's because as Bran continues through this transformation, he will have this more like divine connection with people or with gods, you know, beyond what normal human beings have.
Interesting. Yeah.
Then we move to Catelyn. So it says that Catelyn was sitting alone in a cabin, looking at the blood-stained knife on the table in front of her. A storm was gathering, but somehow they could not see it. They being her and Sir Roderick. So of course she's sitting alone, and she's sitting at the knife that was meant for Bran, this blood-stained knife. But I think that could also be the knife that ends up killing her.
Ooh.
She can look down at the knife that slits her throat.
Wow.
Right? And the storm that's coming can either be her death that I just mentioned, that, you know, that's referenced with that knife, or it can be the catastrophe and failure that she's going to face at King's Landing. The storm is ahead of her. That's where she's going. And her plan to sort of try to, you know, out the Lannisters and blame them for trying to kill Bran is not really going to go well. You have something to say?
She dies in the book called Storm of Swords.
That's true. She does. There you go. So that one was fun. And then we go to like Ned, Sansa, and Arya. And this is where it starts to get really, really fun. All right. So we look at Ned, and it says that Ned was pleading with the king, his face etched with grief. So of course he's pleading with King Robert. In present, he's pleading with him to not kill the wolf. But it doesn't say King Robert. It says the king, pleading with the king, as Ned will do to King Joffrey before he kills him. Mm-hmm. Okay. Sansa. It says that Sansa was crying herself to sleep at night. Of course, right now she's crying because Lady has died. And I think going forward, Sansa will often cry herself to sleep for all kinds of reasons. Her father's murder, for Joffrey becoming who Joffrey is, all her stuff with the Hound, Ramsay. Like Sansa will many, many times in the future cry herself to sleep. Okay. Arya. This one was fun. It says that Arya was watching in silence and holding her secrets hard in her heart. Remember like last chapter and the one before, we talked about how Arya doesn't hold back and she it demands for the truth to be heard and shares her opinion immediately. And we talked about how she's going to have to sort of learn to not do that anymore. I think this incident with Nymeria and Joffrey and Sansa and Micah has sort of taught her that lesson, and she shifted to holding her tongue. But watching in silence and holding her secrets hard in her heart, that is exactly what happens when she becomes assassin Arya. She is always watching in silence and holding everything like inside, and opens up to nobody and becomes this, this loner, trying to survive on her own, and becoming this, assassin who hides in the shadows.
Who, I mean, is literally faceless.
Yes, right. Yes, exactly.
So she's hiding even her identity close to her
Yes,
chest.
a girl
like
has no name. Yeah.
You made me think of that list of names that she kind of chants.
Yes.
That becomes her sort of core.
Exactly. She chants it to herself, and like that.
Yep.
Yeah. She turns so into herself. And when in vignette, when Bran is seeing Ned, Sansa, and Arya, he also says that there were shadows all around them. One shadow was dark as ash, with the terrible face of a hound. Of course, that's the hound. Like, duh. Okay. Easy. The second one. Another was armored like the sun, golden and beautiful. That's presumably Jaime. Jaime is, especially when we're thinking about Bran, like earlier in this chapter when he remembers Bran, he remembers him as like this golden, beautiful thing. Mm-hmm. Like anytime Bran's remembering Jaime, it's in that way. So that's presumably Jaime. It could also be Joffrey. We see Joffrey as being like, armored, shining in the sun with his golden hair, right? Like we see that description a lot. So it could be Jaime or Joffrey, but some Lannister guy, right? And then this one was the one I had the most trouble with, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts. So we've got there were shadows all around them. One of them was the hound, one of them was armored like the sun, golden and beautiful. Over them both loomed a giant in armor made of stone, or a giant in armor made of stone. But when he opened his visor, there was nothing inside but darkness and thick black blood. I really don't know who that is. I have a few options, and I even read a few Reddit threads, and nobody can agree.
You cheated?
I was like, I had my ideas, and then I read some more.
What's your first impulse?
My first impulse before looking into anything was Ilyn Payne.
Really?
Yes, because Ilyn Payne is the hood with nothing inside reminded me of like an executioner's hood. He can't talk, so like that, like armored in stone, like a stony, like he can't talk because his tongue has been cut out, and also he's just evil, and like he sort of looms over everything because he becomes the villain at the end of this book because he executes Ned.
Of this one book.
Yes, right, and most of these like. Actually, that's not true. About half of these futures are going to the end of this book, but half of them are going much, much more beyond. So my first thought was Ilyn Payne, but I don't think that's right. Do you have a gut feeling before I say my other options?
Stone. Mountain.
The mountain.
Also, the mountain becomes that sort of zombie who's a reanimated corpse with nothing behind his eyes.
And the black blood could be poison blood. A lot of people on Reddit think it might be the hound. I mean, it might be, the mountain, which is cool to have the mountain and the hound in here. But see, then you have to think about, okay, the mountain is looming over Jaime and the hound. Does that make sense? Kind of. Other options.
Okay.
I'll start with this one. It could be Tywin Lannister. He lives at Casterly Rock. That could be his armor of stone. And of course, he is looming over Jaime and the Hound as like the Hound works for the Lannisters and the Lannisters work for Tywin. So it could be because he's the daddy Lannister. So it could be that like he is sort of this like, but then the black blood doesn't make sense except that he's just evil and terrible. So I don't really know if that's quite it. The third option, which I am most convinced of, but I'm not 100% convinced of, is Peter Baelish. So the sigil of House Baelish, I had to do some deep dives here. So and remind myself of things. Littlefinger, who we haven't really met in the books yet, by the way.
Won't we meet him in the next chapter?
I think we will. He's the last survivor of House Baelish. His whole house is dead, so he adopts a new sigil, the Mockingbird. Before that, though, his house sigil used to be the stone head of the Titan of Braavos, this like 400-foot stone statue of this Titan. So this giant armored in stone. And I think that, so we know that Littlefinger is sort of orchestrating pretty much everything in this book. So if he's looming over everybody else, that makes a lot of sense, quietly and sneakily. And we don't think of him as a giant, but it's metaphorical, it's symbolic. So I think that might be it. Again, I'm not sure about the thick black blood situation, but that's the one I'm most convinced of, not only because like the symbolism makes sense, but the like his position around everybody makes sense.
He's killed in the north, and it's fairly cold-blooded the way they take him out.
That's true.
Maybe that's it.
That's true. And that, I don't know if that's how it's going to go in the books, but
also he's just fairly cruel.
Well,
the more you learn about him, the more he surprises you with his just cruelty.
Yes, incredibly cruel. So, but I like that it's ambiguous.
And it opens the couplet if we do meet him in the next chapter.
That's true. Yeah, and you know, a first-time reader is of course not going to make that connection. They're not going to know any of these things, but it's interesting, and I liked that. And then there are a couple more. So then Bran zooms out and he goes across the narrow sea. And Dany is not mentioned. Khal Drogo is not mentioned. It says he goes like across the narrow sea, like past like Vaes Dothrak, like mentions Vaes Dothrak, but doesn't mention Dany. Vaes, whatever. Vaes Dothrak. Yeah, it's probably Vaes.
Vaz.
And it says, to Ashai by the shadow, where dragons stirred beneath the sunrise. Of course, we know that Dany's dragons are stirring within their eggs. You had a great theory, Cam, that the moment Dany receives the eggs is when they become like activated as real dragon eggs and not just fossilized stone.
I forgot I said that. That's cool.
Take credit. It was good. So you could think of it in that way. Or if you extend it to the future again, the dragons will be born, I believe, with the sunrise during Dany's rebirth. I believe the sun rises as she is sort of reborn out of the fire. At least that's how it is in the show. I can't remember if that's what happens in the book. I tried to flip back to the last chapter and kind of sort through it, but I couldn't really find out what time of day it was, and I didn't want to read the whole chapter. That felt like cheating. So, but I think it's like they're stirring now, or perhaps they're like actually stirring later. The fun bit about this is, again, Dany is not mentioned by name, but there's stuff in here that still reminded me of Dany. In the chapter, there's a moment where Bran, when he's like flying in his dream, the narration says that he forgot to be afraid, and that rang a bell in me. I was like, where have I heard that? It was in Dany's chapter when she's riding on her horse. It says for a moment she forgot to be afraid. And so I was going back into that chapter, and there's another line in there that says the horse leapt as if she had wings. And of course, this chapter in Bran's dream is him sort of finding his wings to fly. So there, again, in the lovely way that we saw Sapkowski do a lot in The Witcher, we're reminded of Dany, even though her name is not mentioned, but those connections are there.
And I like that there's a parallel between her and Bran because, like you mentioned from The House of the Undying, she's the other character who will one day be inundated with prophecy and visions of the future. So if she's going to glimpse the Matrix too, it's interesting that Bran's getting like a spidey sense that there's someone else here.
Yeah, I like that a lot. The last one is Jon. So we zoom out to the wall and we see Jon, and it says Jon, just listen. Jon was sleeping alone in a cold bed, his skin growing pale and hard as the memory of all warmth fled from him. If we put it in the now, Jon is presumably, we haven't seen him arrive at the wall, but we figure, okay, he got there. He's at the wall. He's, of course, like literally cold and like is forgetting warmth because he's in the wall where it's never warm, and he's having, in like his skin, it says his skin growing pale and hard. So of course, like it's pale because he's in the cold, but it's growing hard as in he's having to become tougher and harder and sort of really face the grim realities of being a member of the Night's Watch. But of course, if we zoom out, Jon will literally be lying on like a cold bed, a cold like slab, as his body decays and becomes cold because he dies. And I was just so excited by like all of these vignettes at every stop. Again, like barring like, I didn't talk about Hodor or Maester Luwin, but I thought it was interesting that he mentioned Hodor because Hodor is about to become so important for Bran's timeline, and even Maester Luwin too, who will like make him his special saddle thing and all this stuff. So Bran can, like at every point, there's a connection to the now, and then of course a connection to the future. And to me, what that's telling me is that the present day and the future are all the same, which I think is kind of what you were saying about summer being this like it's going to come in cycles. Like things happen now and they will happen again in a different way, but they will happen again and again because we're in seasons. This world is obsessed with these, extended, sometimes seemingly never ending seasons, but they do always change. Like summer always comes again, winter always comes again. That's the Stark motto, is that winter is always coming. Even if we're in the middle of summer right now, it's going to keep happening. And so I was just so excited by all of the delightful symbolism and foreshadowing and hints of the future. And it was really fun to go through and unpack.
It seems like a bullseye.
Thank you.
Time is a flat circle. You're seeing the Matrix in this one.
I sure am. Yeah. So
that was fantastic.
Thank you. Yeah. And like Bran, again, he doesn't understand what any of those prophecies mean. At least not right now. He doesn't.
You do.
But I do. and maybe he never will, but at least not until he becomes full three-eyed raven. But it's there and it's presented to him again objectively, and he doesn't wake up and go, well, yeah, I better stop Sansa from having to cry herself to sleep every night. Like he doesn't do that, but he is aware and he knows, and it's like there and objective, and now what do we as the reader do with it? What are the characters around him going to do?
It's the shift in perspective. But of course, a 7-year-old wouldn't see the eternity of time.
No, of course not. Especially
glimpse.
Not when he has like his first, prophetic dream.
Right. He's not 15 like Paul.
Oh my God. Yeah. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's keep things esoteric and weird with my last question here.
Let's do it.
I want to zoom out. This is another throwback to the Tolkien days when we used to play with the identity of the narrator. I want to talk about the crow. The crow could just be a crow. The crow could be a manifestation of, the Matrix or whatever.
Sure.
But it could also be something we talk about too much, like the thrush in The Hobbit or Rocky the Raven.
Or all of the birds in The Witcher.
That.
There were a lot of albatrosses and
Maggie's
sparrows
bird
and
corner.
all kinds of things. I did take a minute today and look up the difference between a raven and a crow. And there are differences between ravens and crows, none of which seem significant or interesting to this story or this chapter, so I didn't get into it. But I did try to do Maggie's bird corner, and I didn't find anything. So I'm curious to see what you found.
I think there are 4 candidates here.
Okay.
And I'm not convinced of any of them, but I think we can get somewhere together.
Cool.
First one is, I noticed towards the end of the chapter, there's a sentence that kind of personifies and anthropomorphizes death. So maybe the crow is death.
Sure.
Bran's, if we take this as like a slow-mo version of his fall, then the Grim Reaper is talking to him, asking him if he wants to live or if he wants to, walk toward the light, Caroline.
Makes sense.
I don't know. That feels out of character for this series, that it's death.
Yeah, I don't think George really personifies death like that. Yeah.
The other answer, and feels more Tolkienian, it could be God, or the god of Middle-earth, the god of Westeros.
Yeah.
Or, like you talked about, the old gods. Because we don't see this thing's face, it's interacting through this sort of metaphor of the crow, an avatar because of the old faceless gods of the north. Maybe this is the voice of one of those faceless gods.
Sure.
I think that's okay, especially because he seems to be connecting with the weirwood specifically during this zoom out.
Right. And so if it was the crow was the old gods, I think he would have connected with the weirwood first and then talked to the crow. So I know what you're saying.
I don't think George R. R. Martin ever shows that explicit an interest or commitment to religion.
Right. He's more interested in how people
Yes.
respond to and interact based on their beliefs and with religion, but he doesn't seem to actually interact with the gods themselves.
Right. He's interested in Stannis, not Melisandre.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Or better, he's interested in Stannis and Melisandre, not the actual Lord of Light.
Yeah, I'm thinking of the scene where Shireen is sacrificed.
Yeah.
He's interested in the human repercussions of extreme religion.
Yeah, not did he do the right thing? Yeah.
Right. The third candidate, and this feels like the most tropey, it could be Bran himself.
Oh,
if he gets to a time as the flat circle, he's viewing everything zoomed out, he's seeing the whole board and the world as the fantasy map at the start of the book, then maybe when he reaches the end of this arc and becomes robot God Emperor Bran, maybe he can then see time as this continuum that doesn't exist to the past and the future, the present, it's all happening right now. And maybe he could talk to himself and lead himself on this journey that he now knows he has to go on.
Sure, yeah.
That could work.
Yeah.
Don't know if it's satisfying, but it kind of makes sense with robot Sandworm Bran, the way we're talking about him.
Yeah.
Fourth candidate is that it could be the current three-eyed raven.
See, that's what I assumed, and I didn't even question it. But it's so interesting that the bird is described as a crow and not a raven.
Because if the ascension to three-eyed raven status is the loss of the self, and you're joining this like East Australian current of three-eyed ravens, right? You're just one of the horde.
Yeah.
Like I gotta stop making Dune comparisons. if that's what Bran becomes, and he loses the Bran Stark part and just becomes the new three-eyed raven, then does he share experience and kind of become all the previous three-eyed ravens? Is this like
the Reverend Mother?
Like becoming the Reverend Mother and getting all the memories and experiences of the previous ones?
Or
is it
like the
that?
Giver. Yeah.
Like, is he sort of all three-eyed ravens?
Yeah.
Because that means that the answer, who is the Crow, it could be sort of a mix between those two last candidates of Bran and the current three-eyed raven. It could kind of be both. Because I think those are the most likely possibilities. And you can kind of fudge it a little bit and say it's both of them if they are on the same EAC together.
Yeah. Because it's like, but by that time, it doesn't matter. There's actually not a
Distinction.
Thank you. My God. I was like, distinguishment. I'm losing my mind.
I'm so glad you tripped over that.
I used all my brain power in my breakdown of the dream. There's not a distinction between Bran and the old three-eyed raven. They become one and the same. Yeah. So it's like, it is the old three-eyed raven, but it is also himself. So I actually think that's probably the more likely answer. And maybe it's called a crow because maybe 70-year-old Bran doesn't know the difference between a raven and a crow. Or maybe it's called a crow because a crow is like, looks a lot like a raven but is smaller, and maybe it's something to do with that. I did look up, and when I was looking up the differences, crows are smaller than ravens. Also, crows live in large groups called murders. Ravens live in pairs. Like they're not as social as crows. And so you could look at it as like sort of Bran's journey. He starts out more as a crow, like he's a normal human being who's social and has a family and blah blah blah. And then as he isolates further and further, he becomes more like a raven, and that he moves into like the pair thing. The partner in that pair could be the other three-eyed raven. It could be Hodor. It could be his wolf. Like, I don't know, but maybe that's part of it as well.
Because I couldn't tell the difference between a crow and a raven.
Yeah, I mean, if I was looking at them, I could. Well, if there were two side by side, I know ravens are bigger and their beaks are a little bit more curved.
I don't know either of those things.
They're really similar.
Like, it's almost an echo dichotomy of the wolf-dog distinction.
Sure, yeah, right. And like crows, I think, are sort of considered to be a bit more like scavengery, and they'll like eat dead stuff, and I think in a way that ravens won't. Ravens are just like the more sophisticated version. We also know in this world ravens carry messages. And so that makes perfect sense that the three-eyed raven is a three-eyed raven and not some other creature, this like carrier of messages, like again in this like neutral, objective way, not in a I have something to say, but just I have something I know is more what it is. So yeah, I like the way you've broken it down though, that it's him and the other one, which are the same thing, I think strengthens your claim that his transformation has already begun.
Yes.
I like that.
And I like that we have to sort of squint for these rules of the magic system.
Mm-hmm.
I know we'll eventually meet the three-eyed raven, but it's not like he's going to give us a tutorial level.
He's not like, this is how it is. Yeah. Uh-huh.
And I much prefer those kind of magic systems.
Me too. Yeah. The point is that it's messy and ambiguous, like even in the way that shadow that I tried to break down. Like, I don't know if we're ever going to get a full answer to who that is.
I'm sorry, I forgot to say it before.
Yes.
Because the Stark story began in Winterfell with an avalanche of Macbeth echoes. There are 3 assassins that they send out in Macbeth. 3 shadow figures. Cool.
Very cool. 3 shadow figures. Also 3 witches. Like,
there you go.
That's lovely. I like that a lot. Man, this was fun. This was really, really fun.
4 pages, and we just did 53 minutes.
Man, I can't wait till we get to the House of the Undying. I'm going to do it all again. Yes, I can't wait.
That can be your first solo episode. No, I think you nailed it.
You had fun with
here.
this too. Thank you.
That was awesome.
Your stuff was great too. It helped me understand stuff better. This was great.
A little peek behind the curtain. These last 2 chapters have really lit up this book for me.
Really?
I've enjoyed these last 2. I was sort of, I don't know. I was faltering.
You were kind of losing your steam. You were like, I like this book, but I don't know what else to say about it.
These past 2 have really lit it up again.
I'm so excited for that. Well, this was such a delight. Our next chapter is with Catelyn. So I think you're right. I think we are going to meet Peter Baelish. So I'm looking forward to that. That'll be Catelyn number 4.
Oh, yeah.
We're starting to really dive into these numbers. So that'll be Fun. Well, let us know what you thought of Bran's dream. Who do you think that third shadow is? There are more theories I didn't get into. Reddit is full of them. And I'm sure you all are too. So share, if you're on YouTube, share in the comments down below what you thought of this dream, our discussion, anything you want to add. And otherwise, if you're not on YouTube, you can send us an email, secondbreakfastpod@gmail.com. We love reading your thoughts and ideas and responses over on the show. You can also DM us on Instagram, Second Breakfast Pod.
Or comment on the Patreon.
Or comment on the Patreon page if you are a patron, which we did plug at the beginning of this
Yes,
episode.
we did.
So check that out. And Cam kept talking about Dune. So if you want to listen to our Dune episodes, they are there for you. If you're on YouTube, we got a whole Dune playlist for you to easily find
This
all of
past
our
Tuesday,
stuff.
I just put out the Dune Messiah discussion.
Oh, that's right. We did. Oh, so much fun. Well, yeah, check all of that out. And I guess that's everything.
Have a great weekend.
Have a
We'll
great
see you
weekend.
back here on Tuesday with a brand new episode. Thank you very much for listening. Bye.
Bye.